Welcome back to Top 5.
The Chibok schoolgirls, 2014. In Nigeria, 276 schoolgirls were abducted from the town of Chibok by the Boko Haram militant group. This mass kidnapping brought international attention to the issues of terrorism and the plight of women's education in the region. Despite a global social media campaign, many of the girls remain missing, and their fates still haunt their families. The plundering of the Kachin, 2014. In Myanmar, armed groups targeted the Kachin people, leading to the abduction of thousands over several years. The victims often faced horrendous conditions and were exploited as forced labor in conflicts that perpetuated ethnic tensions and violence. The Panama Canal laborers, 1910s. During the construction of the Panama Canal, thousands of workers were forcibly relocated from their homes across various countries. Many faced inhumane working conditions, with entire families uprooted and lives destroyed for the sake of progress. The Japanese-American internment, 1942. During World War II, over 120,000 Japanese Americans were forcibly relocated and detained in internment camps across the United States. While not a traditional kidnapping, this mass internment stripped families of their homes, livelihoods, and dignity under the guise of national security. The Stolen Generations in Australia, 1910s to 1970s. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children were forcibly removed from their families by Australian government policies. This mass kidnapping disrupted cultures and communities and led to long-lasting trauma for multiple generations. The Church of England's abduction of native children, 1800s to 1900s. In Canada, thousands of Indigenous children were taken from their families to attend residential schools run by church organizations. Many suffered abuse and cultural erasure. The repercussions of these actions are still felt today among Indigenous communities. The Nanjing Massacre sex slaves, 1937 to 1938. During the rape of Nanking, thousands of women were abducted and sold into sexual slavery by Japanese soldiers. This horrific act of violence left an indelible mark on history, with many survivors left with lifelong trauma. The rebel capture in Uganda, 1990s. Rebels from the Lord's Resistance Army, LRA, kidnapped thousands of children in Uganda. Many were turned into soldiers or sex slaves. The impact on the affected communities was profound, leading to ongoing violence and trauma from these horrific experiences. The Midnight Express of the Khmer Rouge, 1975 to 1979. During the Khmer Rouge regime, many Cambodians were forcibly removed from their homes and relocated to labor camps. Lives were shattered as families disappeared, and the trauma of these abductions lingered on among survivors of the brutal regime. The kidnapping of Colonia Dignidad, 1960 to 1990. In Chile, an isolated commune run by a German expat, Paul Schaefer, saw numerous cases of abduction and exploitation. The community served as a front for human rights abuses, including the detention and torture of political opponents during the Pinochet regime. The Gaza Strip hostage crisis, 1990s. During the ongoing conflict in the Gaza Strip, various militant groups have kidnapped foreign nationals and local civilians for political leverage. The psychological toll on the families and communities involved has been devastating. The Missing Angelinos, 1980s. In Los Angeles, a series of kidnappings led to the disappearance of numerous young children and teenagers. While many were eventually found, the fear and media frenzy surrounding the cases left an indelible mark on the city's psyche. The 1994 Mexico City kidnappings. In the wake of political unrest, dozens of prominent figures and their families were kidnapped in Mexico City. The kidnappers targeted wealthy families, often holding them for ransom, fueling a climate of fear in urban centers. The incarceration of Jewish families during the Holocaust, 1939 to 1945. During the Nazi regime, Jewish families were systematically abducted and sent to concentration camps, where many faced horrific conditions. The mass disappearance of millions left scars that would reverberate throughout history. The Nigeria Civil War refugees, 1967 to 1970. During the Biafran War, thousands of Igbo children were kidnapped and forcibly taken across borders as refugees. The lack of humanity in the chaos left countless families heartbroken and separated. 5. The ISIL kidnapping of Yazidi women, 2014. In Iraq, the Islamic State kidnapped thousands of Yazidi women and girls, subjecting them to sexual slavery and brutal treatment. The ongoing struggle for acknowledgement and justice continues for the victims and their families. 4. The adoption scandal in Guatemala, 1980s to 1990s. In a systematic effort that spanned years, thousands of indigenous children were abducted and placed for illegal adoption, often without parental consent. This egregious act has led to a significant loss of cultural heritage and family lines. 3. The disappearance of the school for the deaf in the Philippines, 1970s. In a harrowing series of events, students from a school for the deaf were kidnapped and trafficked. The anguish of parents, who often never learned what happened to their children, permeates the heart of this tragedy. 2. The abduction of Uruguayans in the Dirty War, 1970s. During Uruguay's Dirty War, thousands of civilians were kidnapped, tortured, and disappeared under the dictatorship. The effects of these mass kidnappings have created generational trauma for families as they search for truth and justice. 1. The disappearance of the 43 Ayotzinapa students, 2014. In Iguala, Mexico, 43 students from Ayotzinapa were abducted by local police and allegedly handed over to a drug cartel. This mass kidnapping has become a symbol of the ongoing issues of corruption, violence, and impunity in Mexico. The family's relentless pursuit for answers has captured global attention, reflecting a tragedy that remains deeply rooted in the fight for human rights.